Tonight, 2 new arrests in the murder investigation of a Leslieville mother.
This whole thing is shaking everybody up.
It's just really shocking. I don't know. I couldn't believe it.
Why one of the people now facing charges is leading to new scrutiny over the nearby community health center. Plus, a spiraling child porn investigation. 22 young children now identified as victims of an alleged predator at Mississauga's MC Day Camp.
Definitely that our services aren't being valued.
And some transit workers speak out, accusing the agency of unfair treatment contrary to labor laws. What the TTC is saying about the allegations. Good evening, I'm Chris Glover. The eyes of the city are once again on Leslieville tonight and a murder investigation that has gripped many people in Toronto. Last month, Caroline Huebner-Macarat was killed by a stray bullet after police allege 3 men got into a gunfight on the street. Tonight, police are announcing 2 new arrests in the case, and one of them in particular is prompting more difficult conversations for a neighborhood already on edge. Sean Jeffords has our top story tonight.
Toronto police have made 2 more arrests in the shooting that caused the death of Caroline Huebner-Macarat. Police say 3 men got into a fight on the street near Queen and Carlaw on July 7th. The mother of 2 was hit by a stray bullet and died. A week later, 32-year-old Damien Hudson was charged with second-degree murder. And then yesterday, 20-year-old Ahmed Mustafa Ibrahim was charged with manslaughter, robbery, and failure to comply with probation. Police are still looking for the 3rd man, described as 18 to 25 years old, with a slim build and a ponytail. The shooting happened near the South Riverdale Community Health Center, which is a supervised injection site. People near the center tonight said the shooting has upset the community.
This whole thing is shaking everybody up because it was so random and it was so violent. It's like they just didn't care.
As part of the investigation, 23-year-old Khalila Mohammed from Pickering was also charged. She faces accessory after the fact and obstructing justice. The harm reduction worker was featured in a CBC story last February on the center. She said she was passionate about her job, helping divert toxic drugs off the street. Late today, the health center's CEO confirmed she was placed on leave last Wednesday for what he called unrelated concerns. In a statement, writing, "These allegations are deeply concerning to us and to the community. They are also devastating and disappointing to the many staff who work professionally and compassionately every day. Residents who live near the health center are frustrated. They organized a public town hall at the end of July where neighbors said the center wasn't doing enough to address violence in the area.
We're continuing to see drug dealing. We're continuing to see, aggressive behavior. And we're seeing an increase of illegal activity happening in the community.
The program will work best if every party can realize that we all share a goal of community safety. And it's got to be safety for people who rely on those programs, as well as safety for the community, for kids walking to school.
The residents say they hope there will be an in-depth review by all 3 levels of government. For its part, the center says it remains focused on strengthening local safety initiatives. Sean Jeffords, CBC News, Toronto.
Across town to Etobicoke now, where a man suffered life-threatening injuries after a shooting this afternoon. It happened near Finch Avenue West and Martin Grove Road at around 4. Police say they were called to the area for multiple reports of gunshots, and they say that they confirmed that a firearm had been discharged but didn't locate the victim at the scene. They later reported that the victim walked into a hospital. There's no word yet on any suspect descriptions. Next to a disturbing situation in Kensington Market today, a number of people were sprayed with bear repellent in what police are calling a random incident. It happened over the lunch hour, police receiving multiple 911 calls about a man spraying people with bear spray on the street and inside a number of restaurants. A 45-year-old was arrested a short time later. There's no word yet on any charges he may face. Paramedics say 3 people were treated on the scene, while another person was taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. A Mississauga camp counselor arrested on child pornography charges earlier this month faces dozens of new charges tonight. The case began with one 6-year-old victim, but now police say many more victims have been identified. Peel Police releasing this video this afternoon.
Investigators have identified a total of 22 child victims, and the victims' families have been notified by police.
26-year-old Alexander Clark was a camp counselor at MC Day Camp near Lakeshore Road East and Hurontario Street. He was arrested on August 2nd and charged with voyeurism and making child pornography after he allegedly filmed a 6-year-old boy in a bathroom. He has now been charged with 27 more offenses, including sexual assault, sexual interference, and forcible confinement. Police believe there could be even more victims, and they're asking anyone with information to come forward. A new twist to tell you about tonight in the ongoing Greenbelt land swap saga. For the first time, we're hearing from one of the developers at the center of the deal, and it comes as critics continue to take aim at the Ford government, saying the controversial move has nothing to do with building affordable housing. Ali Chiasson has that story tonight.
The Premier thinks it's enough to say that their government will look at their processes to see where they went wrong. They think that's enough?
The opposition is not backing down on defending the Greenbelt from development.
This is not at all about building housing. This is about making a few millionaires into billionaires.
Meanwhile, the Ford government is not backing down on their defense. There's a housing crisis, so they're building more housing in the Greenbelt, a decision the Auditor General deemed as biased and influenced by developers.
This is not going to be affordable housing, right? This is going to be luxury sprawl.
Today, one of the developers fires back. Quote, "There will be various housing types, including significant affordable housing, as well as other uses, for example, commercial, institutional, and public spaces such as parks and trails." The TAC Group is among the few and largest Canadian developers with the full range of experience, knowledge, and resources, as well as the land, to build complete and environmentally responsible communities to meet the government's timelines and requirements. Even though both they and the Ford government would like to forge on,
Premier Ford has said the buck stops with him.
This poli-sci prof says
this is going to be an issue that follows the government over the long term. And I think for three reasons. First, the importance of the social movement about protecting the Greenbelt, which has been very active over the past year to 18 months. Secondly, the whole question of corruption makes it interesting for the public. And they want to understand more about it. Third and finally, the question of the Greenbelt and the protection of agricultural lands and the capacity to produce food makes it an issue that the Liberals and the NDP can go and find Conservative supporters who are on their side.
But as the fallout continues, no official Conservative has fallen out of line with the Premier's decision to build on. Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Toronto.
Looking live near Queens Quay and Spadina, 19 degrees and a chance of showers through the overnight. Let's get Colette Kennedy into the conversation now. Hey, Colette, it didn't turn out too badly here in Toronto, but quite a different weather situation across the region tonight.
Yeah, in eastern Ontario, at least through much of the day, it was hard to even know there was a system knocking on the door. And a totally different story, Chris, in southwestern Ontario. And you can see it by the temperatures from the daytime highs where there was more significant, not only cloud cover, but those bands of rainfall. So the high in Sarnia and Kitchener, just 19 degrees, 20 in London. And there were some embedded thunderstorms in there, too, having an impact. And then, hey, Peterborough and Oshawa up to 25 degrees. And you were trying there, Windsor, with that high of 24. So these final bands rotating around this area of low pressure, still having an impact through the Niagara region and into eastern Ontario along the St. Lawrence. But that moves away and summer is back. I know it was here today too, but it maybe didn't feel like it. So we get the sun, but we also get the temperatures going back to normal for our daytime highs. So a very nice Wednesday shaping up. There is more activity to come later on Thursday. I'll go into that in a bit more detail coming up. But your low tonight, 18 degrees, and there it is, 26, even feeling close to 30 tomorrow afternoon, Chris.
All right, well, that sounds lovely. Thank you, Colette. Returning now to one of our top stories from last night, the Ontario Elementary Teachers Union held a solidarity rally at City Hall today. Yesterday, the union announced a strike vote would be coming next month after it says the province refused to meaningfully engage in contract negotiations. Greg Ross has more on the upset union and what the education minister is saying in defense.
Hundreds of delegates from the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario left the union's annual general meeting at around noon today to march to City Hall for what they called a solidarity walk.
We're sending a message to the Minister of Education and to the Premier of Ontario that it's time for them to stop underfunding. It's time for them to come to the bargaining table and to bargain in good faith.
ETFO President Karen Brown says the province isn't listening to any of their concerns in negotiations on a new collective bargaining agreement and is instead putting forward proposals with cuts to salaries and benefits. She says this is why the union is recommending its members vote for a strike this fall.
Our members are frustrated. They're ready to mobilize. They provided a great year of stability. No one wants to engage in job action, but they've had enough. They're feeling disrespected by this government. There's a $22 billion surplus. They have the funds to invest in public education.
Delegates raised a number of issues inside today's meeting. At the top of the list, an increase in violence at elementary schools.
You're talking about anything from bites, kicks, punches, threats. The children in our schools are not getting their needs met. We don't have the personnel, we don't have the resources, and that is a failure of this government.
The province says it is investing more into education.
We're doing it with 2,000 more educators. We're hiring this year, over $680 million more this September compared to last, and a whole suite of supports from financial literacy to reading and writing improvement.
Education Minister Stephen Lecce says he's disappointed in the union's decision, but is committed to continuing negotiations.
I could just assure parents that I'm going to stay focused on getting a deal and keeping kids in school.
The union says the strike vote will happen between September and October. Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
Now to a significant cleanup effort underway in 2 Toronto creeks. Toxic runoff from a huge fire at a chemical factory last week has killed multiple fish and ducks. Toronto Wildlife Centre says some of the ducks that survived were covered by an oily sludge. They had to undergo a special bath to remove the chemicals, and the runoff came from that 6-alarm fire last Friday at Brenntag Canada, a chemical distribution company. Ontario's Ministry of Environment says the runoff affected Mimico Creek and Humber Creek, but not Humber River or Lake Ontario, adding it will not affect municipal drinking water. Now, if you see any birds in distress, you are asked to call the Toronto Wildlife Centre. Turning to Meta's ban on Canadian news outlets, we've certainly heard how it is impacting the big broadcasters and publishers as the tech giant is in the process of removing all news from Facebook and Instagram. But Tyler Cheese shows us some smaller outlets were surprised to find their content also blocked.
You might be forgiven for mistaking the odd Beaverton article for real news. But when it comes to the satire site being wrapped up in Meta's Canadian news ban,
that sent alarm bells going off in all our heads.
Meta is currently in the process of removing all news from its Facebook and Instagram platforms in Canada. That's in response to a new law that would force the company to pay media outlets for content shared on those platforms. Last week, the Beaverton found itself mistakenly included in the ban.
That's such a huge chunk of our readership that, if that just went completely dark, the revenue loss from that would be a huge problem for us.
The Beaverton's editor-in-chief says Meta should be able to determine that his site is satire and not real news. Furthermore, in a letter addressed to Mark Zuckerberg last week, he says it's insulting to be confused with a journalist.
We advised Facebook that their actions were defaming us by calling us a news organization and that we were, in fact, satirists, liars, miscreants, tricksters, and various other negative adjectives.
It's unclear whether or not that letter made an impact, but the Beaverton's profiles have since been restored. But the same can't be said for everyone caught in the tech company's net.
I am the host of Dr. Mouse Rock and Roll Lunch Party on CIUT 89.5 FM, Tuesdays at noon.
Dan Lavransky is a volunteer host at the University of Toronto's radio station. He's amassed a global audience by promoting his show on Facebook and Instagram.
If I can't even provide them with the radio station's website address so they can do that, that's a big issue as far as I'm concerned. And it really has nothing to do with the greater issue at hand here.
He's hoping something changes soon so he can reach his audience again. In a statement provided by Meta, the tech company says accounts that focus on matters of general interest and current events can request a review if they're being affected. Last week, CBC also joined other news publishers in requesting Canada's Competition Bureau to investigate the ban. Tyler Cheese.
Welcome back. People riding the TTC had new payment options today. People can now tap their debit or credit card to get on transit in Toronto, and that includes cards on a smartphone or smartwatch. Now, seniors and youth will still have to keep using their Presto card if they want to get that fare discount. A temporary worker with the TTC, meanwhile, is alleging mistreatment tonight. His concerns include even some basic dignities like using the washroom or getting into the station. Olivia Bowden shares his concerns and how the Transit Authority is reacting.
Definitely that our services aren't being valued. We do provide such an essential service.
We're protecting the identity of this TTC customer service agent because they fear speaking up could cost them their job. They say temp staff contracted to the TTC have been working with shorter breaks, get no keys to staff washrooms, and sometimes have to pay to enter the stations where they work. Many of the customer service agents are hired via a third-party staffing agency called Talent World, then contracted out to the TTC.
I've noticed since joining a significant difference between normal employees and how the TTC treats contracted workers specifically.
On June 30th, they and other temp employees received an email from Talent World stating that the TTC's policy only provides a 15-minute break for working 5 to 8 hours. That's seemingly contrary to labor laws, and that's not the only concern.
Washrooms is a big issue. Before I joined, our colleagues used to get keys for the washrooms. Each station has their own set of employee washrooms that are private, with no access to the public, and yet at some point they were taken away, and we were forced to use public washrooms.
And they say they have to use their Presto card to access the stations where they're assigned.
The customer service representatives who have to go in and out of stations, travel to stations via the TTC, they don't get one, and they have to pay out of their own pockets.
But the TTC says none of these allegations are true. In statements to CBC Toronto, it says temp workers are entitled to a 30-minute break, and half of that is paid. And when it comes to washrooms, it says that full-time TTC employees are supposed to unlock the doors for temp workers and also let them into the stations where they work. The temp agency, Talent World, told us through their parent company that the email about the breaks was a miscommunication. Still, some labor rights experts have concerns.
I mean, this is particularly upsetting to hear that it's happening at the TTC because the TTC is a public service.
Ella Bedard is a lawyer and organizer with the Workers' Action Center. She says sometimes temp workers in many fields face precarious work environments.
It's easy to say after the fact, oh, that this was a misunderstanding, but we see this all too often.
And temp employees aren't part of the TTC's union. So the union says that means it can't help them out.
We willingly stand for upwards of 12 hours at times, and we want to provide such a great service to the residents of Toronto.
Neither the TTC or Talent World could tell us how many temp workers are employed by the transit agency or how it plans to communicate the breaks policy to their employees. Olivia Bowden, CBC News, Toronto.
A longtime Leafs legend has died. Bobby Baun was a tough defenseman, perhaps best known for his gritty performance helping Toronto win the 1964 Stanley Cup.
Langlois shoots it off the boards. Bob Baun lets it drive. It goes, score!
All right, and that was the winning goal in Game 7 against the Detroit Red Wings. At the time, Baun was playing on a broken ankle. He'd been carted off the ice on a stretcher earlier that game after Gordie Howe fired off a slap shot that shattered that bone. Baun played 17 seasons in the NHL from the 50s until 1973, and most of those years were spent with the Buds. Bobby Baun, also fondly known as Boomer, he was 86 years old. Last word tonight to you, Colette, especially since, Colette, you promised summer weather is returning tomorrow. A nice way to end the show.
I know, Chris, right? There have just been times where it really hasn't felt like summer, even though it is summer. had, some decent days, but cool temperatures too, parts of July and August, and it's time to turn that around again. We are drying and clearing out as the system moves away overnight tonight. High pressure moves in, so we get to welcome back the sun, not only on Wednesday, but a good chunk of Thursday as well will be dry and sunny. Things change kind of later in the day into the evening hours, so it's weekend, it is summertime, and that means it's going to feel like it as we go into this weekend. Hazy, hot, and yes, we'll see the humidity building, especially it looks like for the second half of the weekend, where it's going to feel like we're in those mid to upper 30s with the humidex values. So that's what's ahead. Overnight, there it is. As that ridge kind of builds in, you see that eroding cloud deck. The setup pretty nice. Now 6 a.m. still some rain showers into eastern Ontario, but dry elsewhere, a few fair weather clouds, and then we just get into all of that sunshine and things looking good. A little humidity tomorrow, but nothing that feels too sticky or too difficult to deal with. If you're working outside, of course, then it's a bit of a different story, because even when it feels like 30, or if you have any kind of respiratory issues, you do want to make sure you're staying hydrated still, okay? Thursday, we set off to great conditions. A few isolated showers pop up into the afternoon, but this line along the front comes in as we go into the afternoon, earlier afternoon here towards western sections of Lake Erie, and then towards the evening hours, maybe ruining your patio plans into the city. So be aware of that, because some embedded thunderstorms likely, and will cool down just for one day behind that. Temperatures tonight, watch out for some of these cooler readings, maybe a bit unexpected. Could be 15 Windsor, you might even drop down to 14 or so. Tomorrow, the high in Toronto, 26. There you go. Thursday, 26 as well. That slight cool down Friday. And then you're seeing what's happening as we get towards that weekend plus summer equals this.
All right. Thank you, Colette. Should be a nice day tomorrow. I hope you enjoy it. That's our show for you tonight. Thanks for watching. Farah Morelli has your next local newscast tomorrow at 6 o'clock, and I'll see you back here tomorrow night at 11. Have a great night, everyone.